Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I am Karl Cassell, your moderator for today. With the ever-changing demographics in most communities and in businesses, there is a call for diversity and inclusion. Companies, in order to compete globally, are realizing that their organizations and/or boards should resemble the communities in which they operate. Today we have three panelists that will help us dissect this issue and discuss if current initiatives are working or need to be improved. To my immediate left, we have Anthony Arrington, who is is a managing partner with Top Rank. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
And in the middle here, we have Cherrie Spurlin, who is Associate Director of MRA, the Management Association. Good morning.
Morning.
And our final panelist, we have Raymond Siddell, who is the owner of Cedar River Inc. Excuse me. Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's jump in. A lot of people will first ask, well, what does diversity mean, or explain when someone says diversity and inclusion, what that means. So to each of you, what is your perspective of what diversity means?
Sure. So, diversity means, I think the first thing people typically think, obviously, is it's race, it's ethnicity. But diversity is much more than that. There's diversity of thought, diversity of geography, diversity of mindset, diversity of ideas, diversity of gender. So it means multiple things.
Diversity to me is differences, really. And when I think of diversity personally, I think of getting to know people individually, who they are, and what they can bring to the table with their different perspectives and backgrounds. And that's really how I see diversity.
Perfect. Raymond.
I agree with Cherrie. Diversity to me is those differences and bringing people together with different skill sets and the ability to execute your goals with a variety of people.
And so let's talk a little bit about our current community, our companies, our boards, commissions within the city. Do we see those companies, those boards, these commissions resembling the changing demographic, or would you guys say they're still remaining pretty homogeneous? And anyone, please.
I would say in Iowa, it's going to take time. Our population isn't as diverse as we'd like to see it. But I feel like as a community, we're really embracing that. And diversity and inclusion have become important to companies, communities, and even within the school districts. I see it more and more.
So I think there's a bridge from, this conscious inclusion to unconscious, and we've got to cross that bridge. I don't think we're there yet by any means. I think there's sort of an awakening, I guess, so to speak, and my hope is we don't go back to sleep. But I think we've gotten better. I think always that first step, and maybe it's not the first step, but it's acknowledgement that we can do better as a community, as an organization, as a state, and I think we're seeing that. And so that makes me feel good. So.
Anything?
I think they covered a lot of that.
Okay. How does diversity already exist, and is it being celebrated at certain levels in our community, in organizations? And if it is, or if it isn't, what pushback do you see?
Going back to your comment about conscious and unconscious inclusion, I think that we do see the diversity, but it's more on that conscious, making sure that we're including everybody, where I think focusing more on the skill sets and making sure that everybody's included for a variety of different reasons is really important. I think as far as the pushback is concerned, I think that's just personal beliefs and things that kind of hold you back from wanting to see maybe a different perspective on something, not necessarily regarding that person's race or gender or sexual orientation, but just honing in on their skill set. But sometimes those things that set you apart from them will hold you back from being able to see that.
It's I think there's unconscious pushback, again, that unconscious bias. I think there's a lot of deliberate pushback, but I think the more of the pushback is unconscious, and I think it's a level of comfort. I think there are organizations that celebrate diversity well, and there are organizations that maybe perceive it as a buzzword, or perceive it as routine or transactional, so to speak. And so, when it's forced upon organizations, the natural intention is to say, is this at the exclusion of? Is this at the exclusion of? And it's not. And so the question is, how are organizations rolling it out to disengage and diffuse a lot of that resistance of, oh wait, is this at the exclusion of another party, of another group? And it's typically not. So.
I think diversity is all around us every day, and it gets me really excited to think about that and where we are, celebrated. I think, yes, there's some companies and communities that do it well.
Right.
I think, it's looking at those best practices, looking at those role models, if you will, and saying, how can we do this more? How can we bring this, to the table for us to make our communities, our companies better? I think there's always something to learn.
So Anthony, you brought up kind of the pushback, and there might be some fear that it would exclude another group. For any of you, why is there that feeling? And is it justified? And if not, how can different initiatives, or I would say most importantly, dialogue, help to ease some of those fears?
Well, I mean, is it justified? I think it's natural. I think the political and social environment is aiding and abetting the challenge and the divisiveness and the perception. When you look at a three-pronged approach, right? You talk about immigration, you talk about police brutality, and you talk about politics, and you mix all those together, and then you throw race in there. It just creates a boilerplate. And so what you're seeing is that challenge coming into the workplace, and it creates this fear, again, at the exclusion of. And typically it's been, and if we're very honest and we're very transparent about that fear typically has come from middle-aged white men. There's this fear out there, good or bad, that, at the exclusion of middle-aged white men, and that's not the case at all. It's the last thing that should be feared. But that's natural when you continue to hear what's happening in the media, and when you know the statistics coming from BLS about where the minority population is going in another 20 or 30 years. So you couple that together, and sometimes that's natural, but I think that's where that's coming from, if that makes sense.
Yep, perfect sense.
I think change is hard, changing mindset, changing behavior, changing the way people have thought or done things. And I think with change, fear is a natural reaction. But what we can do as leaders is create safe space, create a culture, a company culture within our organizations that allow people to talk about what scares them, what bothers them in a respectful, appropriate manner.
Right.
And I think when that happens, when we're able to talk about why this scares us, we're opening to learning, right? We're listening, we're asking questions, we're doing all of those things, and those are the things that allow us to get past the fear and move forward with progress.
Yeah.
And that's just, what we need to do. So I think fear is okay when you allow a safe space where people can talk about it in an appropriate way.
Right.
Anything to add?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. So, Cherrie, you brought up the leaders piece. How best should leaders of companies and communities respond to the desire to have D&I initiatives? How should they best respond?
They should lead the charge, absolutely. And I think they should do it, with communication. I think they should do it, with verbal communication, with the, the communication that you see, the way they act, the way they respond to things. I think if the leaders in the community or leaders in companies don't find value in diversity and in inclusion, then, it's not going to take fold as it should. It's not going to become as important as it needs to be. And so I think they need to stand up. And I see that. I see that in our community. I see it in the companies that we work for. My company, we're often asked to come in and help work with initiatives and help them really stick. It's not about putting a poster on the wall, right? We've all seen those posters,
Right.
you know.
Watch the video.
Yeah, I mean, the posters are great, but it's not just about that. It's
Yeah.
also, what are we
Yeah.
doing? What are the behaviors? How is this, you know, fitting into the culture that we want to have as a society, as a community, within our organizations? And do our core values match this? Do our belief systems match this? And I think leaders really have to make that happen.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
No, I mean, I would add to that. So it starts completely at the top. And every organization that I've learned from or heard about that has made a change, it starts from the top. And it starts with, we are going to do this, but here's why, here's how. And here's what's going to happen. I love telling the story about a podcast I listened to with the chief marketing officer at HP. It's one of my favorite stories to tell, and I'll try to be really quick. But the point is that this gentleman who had control over the supplier base understood who bought our computers, who buys our printers, diverse people, diverse humans. So we need to work with organizations that look and sound like us across the world. And he was looking at a supplier base and wasn't seeing organizations that they were buying products from that looked like the people that they sold products to. And he made the decision that in order to do business with us in the future, you need to improve that. The long of the short story is he gave them a year to do it. They came back and the diversity within their organizations improved, and therefore his businesses improved. That started with somebody who was in charge and made a decision that we are going to do this, and here's why. I'm not forcing this on you. You have a choice, and your choice is you can do business with us or you cannot. So those are financial implications that started at the top and did not affect business, did not affect morale with the organization. It took time, that's all.
Is there an economic imperative for companies to embrace diversity and inclusion? And if so, how? And I'll go with the business owner first.
I mean, I think, so being a storefront business myself, you know, and looking at diversity at my customer base, just like what you were talking about with HP, you know, it's imperative for me to welcome my customers no matter who they are, and they're going to see that in my business activities, my day-to-day operations, as well as the employees that I hire and bring on to my staff. So I think that is imperative to continue to do that and basically provide for the customer and show them that that you want to be who you're working with as well. You want to be able to relate.
Absolutely, the workforce. And if you're not feeling it yet, you're going to be feeling it, right? And so I think in order to keep, you know, a company going strong, you need to attract talent, and you need to track all talent from everywhere, and you have to initiate that within every part of your organization. You have to initiate it with, how are you hiring people? You know, how are you posting those jobs? Where are you posting them? Where are you attracting the talent from? What questions are you asking in the interview? To when you're onboarding people, do they know that you have a culture of inclusion? Do they feel it when they walk in the door? Are you bringing people to the table? Are you inviting people along? And I think if you're not doing those things as a company, start, because it's probably not going to end well.
Yeah. No question. There's absolutely, you can tie diversity to money, as we just did with the HP situation, but to take it further, I mean, I don't make these numbers up. The BLS tells us where the population is going of this country, and it tells us in another 10 years that there's going to be more minority babies born than there are majority Caucasians. Those aren't Anthony Arrington's numbers. Those are statistics from scientists who tell us that. And they're telling us that they're going to be our tax base. They're going to be buying the houses. They're going to be working. They're going to be buying the products. So the question is, as an organization, if you want to be around another 10, 15, 20 years, are you going to start hiring people that look like your customers? Because if you don't, those customers will stop buying from you at some point. If it's not happening now, check yourself in 5 years, check yourself in 10 or 20. You're not going to be around.
Well, and I think
Those are just numbers.
to that, Anthony, you know, companies are getting better about
Yeah.
being creative and being innovative, and there is a lot of competition,
Yeah.
you know, through different industries. And I think if you want, there's facts about if you want to have a company that brings innovation, you have to have inclusion, you have to have a culture that welcomes diversity,
Right.
and your revenue, you know, there's facts, 1.4, you know,
Right.
your revenue is going to go up.
Right. And that's not a bad thing, right?
Great
That's a
thing.
great thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's a really good thing. And you can make money doing it.
Yes.
You know, so then my question on the flip side would be, and you guys have kind of answered it, but maybe you can delve a little deeper. Are there long-term consequences if this is ignored?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you just spoke on it. I mean, if you're not doing those checks down the road, if you're not experiencing it now, you're going to start losing those customers.
Yep.
They're going to go elsewhere where they do feel that you know who your customer is, and
Right.
that you're hiring the talent, and that you're including anybody, everybody,
Right.
in order to fill whatever product or need it is you provide. But your customer is going to go where they feel most comfortable,
Yeah.
and they can experience that inclusion.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, walking to the door and being invited to the table. You know, that's exactly what customers want. So.
I'm no economist. I'm no BLS magician. I just know what I read, and I allow the smart people to tell me what's happening. And the smart people tell me, Karl, that you're going to be in trouble if you're not paying attention financially. You will not be in business. And that's not a That's not like a warning or anything. It's just that's
reality.
business.
Yeah.
I mean,
When I think long term, I'm a mom, so I think of my kid, right? Long term, what's the future going to be like
Right.
for our kids? And I'm excited because my daughter's entered high school, and they have really created a culture of inclusion and really making diversity important. And I think, you know, she's in high school. In a few years, she'll be working. That scares me, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing, that's the workforce that we're going to be bringing in as,
Right.
you know, as companies, as leaders. And she's growing up in a high school where these are values, these are important, and they talk
Yeah.
about it on the daily. And so I think we need to be able to speak to that as well and say, yes, we value these things too. Come work for us. We're all here together to do this
Right.
together. And I
Right.
think that'll mean a lot for really attracting that talent.
yeah, absolutely.
So without necessarily giving the names of organizations, either that you're a part of or that you have been a part of, what ways have you seen resistance to diversity and inclusion in past organizations or in the community in general? And how did you respond, or how will you respond in the future if you see that again?
So I'll use an example. I mean, I've been in the staffing industry for a number of years, and I had the fortune or misfortune of visiting a lot of organizations, and I typically see this in the manufacturing environment. But Karl, I can tell you the number of times that I've heard organizations say things like, you know, those Chicago guys, those Chicago guys. I'd love to hire them, but those, you know, and as a professional, I have to sit and listen to that. And this happens in our backyard. I worked with an organization who had an opportunity to hire someone who had a back injury, who was a military guy. They didn't know who the person was, but they knew that we had a candidate who had a back issue and had to sit every 4 hours or so. That probably a reasonable accommodation of a high chair in this about 15-foot radius that this person worked in all day probably would have helped that person with their back, with the disability. One of our veterans, by the way, as well as help probably other employees. And so when you see that type of resistance, sometimes it becomes a bit of a challenge. So.
I can come up with a specific example of organizations that I've been a part of. But at the end of your question there, you asked about how I'll respond and with resistance. And I think just especially as a business owner, understanding the talent that people have, and that you talked about where you post your ads and how you word things. You know, it's really important. and just ensuring that myself as a business owner, that I'm mindful of that, so that talent wants to come work for me. And then if on the flip side I experience, as a business owner, my manager per se having some sort of resistance, making sure that the policies are in place with the inclusion, and making sure they understand that that's what we do. And like you said, you just got to do it, and say this is what we do.
And it's okay. I think it's okay to be nervous and apprehensive about something you haven't tried before. I would say seek out peers and professionals that can help you. Guide you through those things, be it legal, be it ADA issues, be it how do I communicate with this particular culture, things like that.
Sure.
Lead by example. That's what I think of. I think of, if I was watching or overhearing this, what would I want that other person to say? What would I want them to do? And I think really it's appropriately saying, this is not okay. We can't have this conversation, or we're not going to move forward with this. Let's move on, or even redirecting, and then pulling them aside later. But it's really just making sure that you're standing up and saying, this isn't okay. I think it's going to happen. People say things, and I think it's how we react to that and how we can help them is really what's important at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to push them out or push them away, because that's not inclusive, right? That's going against what I believe.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, let's go, let's figure this out together. Let's work through this together.
And so a lot of times companies are oversaw by boards, or cities are overseen by councils and commissions. Is there a need for greater diversity amongst our city councils, amongst our largest employers here in the corridor, and I would say nationally, in government, in sports and entertainment? You talk about your daughter, do children have to see a greater diversity of individuals in positions of leadership in order for it to change, or are we waiting on the folks already there to invite the change?
So I know you were speaking on a much larger level, but I'm going to speak to an organization that I'm familiar with and a population that we serve. I think the answer to that question is yes. Back to what I said earlier about being a business owner and wanting my customer to feel comfortable. Being on a board here in town for a population that we serve that is an underserved population, and we need to make sure that our board and that our staff is very well aware of the diversity and the clientele that we're serving, to ensure that we are welcoming them in with open arms and able to serve them to the best of our ability, since that's why we're there. That's why we put ourselves out there. And so yes, I think we do need to see that diversity across the board, even down to a smaller organization that just operates here in our own city.
Yeah, absolutely. I think boards, they're responsible for driving organizations' decision-making, helping monitor their spending, where they invest in their communities. Oftentimes, maybe, depending on the type of organizations, what type of financial investment they make in businesses. So when you don't have people of diverse thought, diverse ethnicity, or diverse genders at the table, by nature, not often deliberate, but by human nature, decisions are made without thinking about those groups, those individuals, or those types of organizations, however you want to define diversity. And so therefore, there's no voice at the table. There's no leverage, and there's no leverage, there's no growth with those organizations, and then you become the status quo. So I absolutely think there needs to be diversity at board levels. And I think if you look at organizations that are successful, many of them have that.
Sure.
I always operate on the premise that, you pick the best individual for the job,
Yes.
whether it's a board or whatever the position is. But it really goes back to, what are your practices when you're filling those seats, right? And making sure that you're very intentional about how you're bringing in talent, how you're bringing in board members. What are you doing? And I think if you're doing that right, you're going to get diversity.
That's a very good
point. And I think that's the best thing, right? Because that board, yeah, you're going to have different perspectives. You're going to have
Right.
different people coming in, and you're really going to be able to take it,
Right.
really have a great board.
Cherrie makes a good point, right? You diversify the options. By nature, diverse organizations happen. If you diversify the talent, right?
Yeah.
The best person will rise to the top, and you'll have more options for that best person to be a woman or a person of color or a person with a disability. So that's a very good point. Yeah.
So I have one final question. We have 5 minutes left. Cherrie, earlier you brought up change is hard. So are people right to be scared for their communities? Anthony, you mentioned those guys from Chicago. When diversity initiatives are implemented, are people right to be scared? And if so, what do we need to change that fear?
I never tell people how they should feel. I think we all have emotions, and I think one of the best things about being human is we can have emotions, right? Again, it goes back to how do we react to that? Why are they scared? What's happening within their environment that makes it so they can't trust this initiative, or that we want to be inclusive, that we want to have a culture of diversity? What is it about that? And it's really going back to having those hard but appropriate, good conversations, and getting to know people on an individual level, building those relationships, and being able to ask those questions like, why are you scared? What can we do to help? And I think when you get to the underneath and you figure out what's going on, and if they're going to be open, that initiative is going to take full 10 times faster, because people weren't locking up, people weren't defensive. You're coming out and you're having those conversations.
Yeah.
Couple minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think additionally, through the entire conversation, it's been brought up about inclusion, exclusion, and I think you're going to get fear on both sides of that, and I think that's really natural, back to having emotions and being uncomfortable. So I think being scared is definitely okay, but asking the right questions, and then those who are already practicing that inclusion, speaking up and making sure that people around them understand that it's a good thing, and that it's positive.
I'm reminded of my friend, I'm giving him a shameless plug, Kyle Horn, who runs America's Job Honors, who celebrates diverse employers who hire diverse candidates. And he always tells a story about he got into this. He was a very jaded manager when he saw people of color or people of lower socioeconomic status come into his company looking for temporary jobs. He had a completely negative view of them. And as he started listening to their stories and understanding their backstory, changed his life forever. Changed his life forever. And so he sees them completely differently. He doesn't see them as criminals anymore like he used to, and that's pretty cool.
Wonderful. Well, that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank each of you for giving your perspective and insight on this topic. This little bit of time doesn't exhaust the topic. So hopefully within our communities and within our organizations, we continue to have this. So thank you guys. Without the sometimes uncomfortable conversations of diversity and inclusion taking place, our local governments, companies, and boards remain homogeneous. It is time to include all the necessary voices and perspectives at the tables of decision in order to create a more perfect union. Thank you for joining us this morning on Ethical Perspectives on the News. We hope you will join us again next week. Good day.